Welcome to another episode of Progress, Potential, and Possibilities, discussions with fascinating people designing a better tomorrow for all of us. I'm your host, Ira Pastor.
Welcome, everybody, again to another episode of our show, bringing back, an awesome friend of the show, honored of being rejoined actually for his fourth appearance, our fourth time guest, Bill Taranto. President of the Merck Global Health Innovation Fund, a really cool corporate venture capital group established back in 2010 as a strategic response to various challenges surrounding Merck's core business of discovering, developing, and marketing innovative drugs and vaccines. And Bill, has over 3 decades of experience in the healthcare industry. The fund is an evergreen fund. I think last time we chatted was around 600 million, but I think probably those numbers might have changed a bit, focused on various opportunities that are adjacent to Merck's core business of pharma and vaccines. And last year, under his leadership, they had invested more than $1 billion in somewhere around 70 companies with somewhere around $7 billion in exits. Prior to Merck, Bill had spent 18 years at J&J in various roles, responsible for evaluating and creating various new healthcare business models through venture capital, through M&A, and prior to J&J, spent 8 years in the investment banking world. Looking forward to talking all about what's going on in 2025. Really excited to have him back for his fourth time. Bill Taranto, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much. I appreciate it. Didn't realize I was a 4-time guest, but I really like your show and I'm always happy to do it. So I really look forward to talking to you today. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, definitely. For those that maybe dropping in on this episode before the first 3, I would like to just take a little time to again hand things to you at the beginning, just to reintroduce yourself, reintroduce the fund, and a little bit of just sort of the strategic model. We talked about it in the past that Merck does all the drug development and vaccine development stuff. You do everything adjacent to ultimately make things, whether it's drug discovery, manufacturing, real world evidence generation, everything in between, all the supporting technologies, interesting tools, services along the way. Take a little time to just reintroduce the group, and then we'll go further.
Fantastic. Thanks, I appreciate it. So again, my name is Bill Taranto, and I'm president of the Merck Global Health Innovation Fund, which is one of Merck's 3 funds. We have one that's called the Merck Research Labs Fund that's dedicated to therapeutics. We have the Merck Impact Fund, which is just what it sounds like. It does small investing in impact, investing around the world. And then there's our fund, the Merck Global Health Innovation, which is dedicated to digital and enabling technologies and data. As Ira said, we were established in 2010. We're an evergreen fund. Today, we've grown quite a bit. Most people don't realize we only started as a $125 million fund back in 2010. We had doubled that in 2013 and then doubled again in 2015. And then recently we got another 250 million. So we have access to 750, but we're right now a $600 fund. We've only moved up to the $600 million range, but we have access to another 150 should we want it, to keep expanding. So the fund keeps expanding. And as you said, over the years, we've done probably now close to 90 investments, had some 40 some odd exits. Funds, but evergreen a number of times. Very, very successful fund, both strategically and financially. Where we invest, we focus on what's called pharma services, which is kind of a niche area of healthcare because it obviously reflects where not only who my corporate parent is, Merck, but we have kind of a built-in clientele of all pharma companies. What we mean by pharma services is we focus on sort of 4 big areas. We focus on R&D, so trying to look at areas where we can help Merck in the drug discovery space. So doing things like AI and ML and drug discovery. novel drug platforms, radiology, pathology, areas where we can enhance and speed the way Merck does drug discovery, differently than we do it today. And we also look at clinical development, so trying to understand where technology impacts clinical trials, and that's every part of clinical trials. And that's a little newer area for us in the R&D space. But as we're starting to see pharma now adopting more technologies in the clinical trial space as we move forward. Another big area for us is around IT and supply chain. We don't do much in manufacturing. It's more IT and supply chain. IT is more infrastructure. That's kind of a little bit of legacy GHI fund, but still nonetheless areas where we look at, which is data security, privacy and storage, data aggregation, integration and harmonization, and analytics and informatics. And then on the supply chain side, which is really new to us, which we've only been doing in the last 3 years, but it's becoming probably one of the biggest areas we're investing in because it's all data. And as you know, our thesis is data is the currency we're going to use to transact in the future healthcare market. We want all our companies
Yep.
to be data companies, and that's really where supply chain sits. So it's everything around, pharma loses quite a bit of goods to fraud, theft, damaged goods. We ship things the wrong way. Maybe it should have gone by plane. We send it by boat. And trying to think of how we might create, in a sense, like an airport control tower where we're tracking all raw materials coming in and finished goods going out, and trying to understand, almost even creating digital twins around pallets, digital pallets, where we're tracking everything in real time of what's happening with all these materials, and then by doing that, the cost savings, tremendous for our industry. The next area we look at, we still do some things around the patient, around access, and as a pharma-owned venture capital firm, we're subject to anti-kickback statutes, so we have to be a little careful within the space of where we can't be in the corporate practice of medicine or practicing medicine, which is all that means. But we still do things like monitoring. We do decision, support tools. We'll do care coordination, social determinants of health, more things I would just say around access and ability to get care. And then the last space is the data. We're still real world evidence and real world data, still trying to give Merck access to data globally, and then access to informatics and analytics on top of that. And that's kind of the four big areas that we sort of invest in. And lastly, what I'll say is we're a growth equity fund. So we're typically mostly Series C or later. We do an A and B round occasionally, but we don't do any startup or seed capital. And then one last thing we do, I do manage a private equity firm, and we use that to, which is, really kind of interesting for today's conversation about scaling. We do use that to scale assets, where we'll bring in larger capital from private equity firms, maybe merge companies together, acquire companies and put them together, and build the kind of scale that pharma needs in order to, to do the kind of things that they want to do with these type of assets. So that's kind of a, quick sort of 60,000-foot view of the venture fund. But and the nice thing that I'll just mention, we're celebrating our 15th anniversary, which was in April. So I'm now in starting my 16th year, but to have the resiliency to last 15 years in a corporate venture environment is pretty good. So we think we've done a really nice job in being resilient and doing the things we need to do to provide both financial and strategic returns.
Absolutely, absolutely. And Bill, 3 years ago when we first chatted, we spent a lot of time. Actually, it was a smaller story then, but you walked us through, a lot of what was going on in the space at that time. 2 years ago, we entered this interesting era of the down round, and where valuations, okay, maybe they had peaked a bit, and you had taught us all about, how companies have to rethink their stories and conserve cash and really think about how costs should be cut, not too much and so forth. And then last year when we chatted, an interesting era of sort of M&A and consolidation was happening in the digital space. Could you just sort of give us the lay of the land of, here we are, we're about halfway through 2025. What are the trends that you guys are looking at? What are you seeing out there? What do the markets look like? Take us a little into all things 2025, if you would.
Yeah, it's been really interesting. When we were ending 24, we really started to see an uptick in capital coming into, especially the growth equity market where I'm at, and certainly the startup capital was a lot of capital coming in. The A and B rounds were still struggling a little bit. Nonetheless, we're starting to see capital, and the markets were starting to open up. And that kind of lasted through January and February. And then, unfortunately, with some chaos around, especially in healthcare with some of the DOGE cuts around the NIH, that certainly affected us. The tariff situation is still unresolved, though, there's hope that that can be resolved. And what we did was we kind of went back in time a little bit where everybody pulled back again. Capital kind of was pulled back. Everybody wants to do this sort of wait and see. And so capital's been hard to get. I wouldn't say valuations per se have been affected dramatically in the sense that they're probably where they were back at the end of 24, kind of flat rounds, some up rounds, but nothing's, crazy. Some companies got some slight upticks if they were performing well, but the kind of down rounds were sort of leaving, which was a good sign. So we're still okay there, but I'm still noticing there's still companies struggling to get capital into their companies. We've struggled even in our own fundraising with some of our companies. I think we did a nice job. We have a big portfolio of around 45 companies. I think we did a really nice job of getting just about all of them capitalized through end of 26, which is pretty good. But I still think the markets are still slow to react right now. I think what we're hopeful for is sort of a repeat of last year, where as we move into the fourth quarter, we see things opening up, where we'll see the capital markets opening up, both from the private investor and the public market arena. I think as we see the tariff situation be resolved, that's a good sign. I think whether you're pro or anti the tax bill that came out, it does help corporates in a sense where it does help spending. So, that's a good sign too, at least as it relates to deployment of capital back into the market. So I would just say we're hopeful, cautiously hopeful. There's still good signs. Good companies still get funded. They may not get funded to the level that they wanted, but they still get funded. So I think capital is definitely coming in somewhat, but it's not at the levels that we saw before. Or it's, when a company maybe wants to raise 40 million, they might get 25 of it instead of the full 40. So they may not fully reach, what they need, and they'll have to re-raise again. But slowly we're starting to see signs that we're moving in a positive direction again. But we've kind of had this sort of first, second quarter almost back in time of what was happening last year. And now we're, back to the future, so to speak, which is happening now. So, I'm very positive. I always have a good outlook. It just takes smart management of portfolios, but it's still going to be, a tough year for some of the portfolio companies that can't raise. We'll see what happens by the end of the year, but I'm positive by the fourth quarter we'll get back to where we were last year with an uptick in everything.
Got it. Got it. So perfect. So, this leads very nicely into an article that you just published several weeks ago entitled "Can Corporate Venture Capital Make Innovation Matter?" And the general gist here, and we'll be going into, drilling down on a lot of it. Venture capital returns are great, but returns that yield innovation better, scaled innovation even better, and then ultimately scaled innovation that impacts patients the best, and sort of that's the gold standard that we want to be looking for. And you in this article, it's very interesting because you call out something known as innovation theater, basically saying, look, in this continuum here, we see a lot of people, whether the corporate venture capitalists, I don't know if this applies to regular VCs or other versions along the way, that only focusing on the returns part, which is okay, important, but we got to go a lot further than that. What does innovation theater mean exactly? And can you talk about it in terms of, obviously you're talking about this from a perspective of a major corporate venture capital organization, but does this sort of permeate all the other types of investors that you work with, co-invest with, and so forth?
Yeah, so the whole idea of the article was, in order to really make innovation matter in a large corporate, it's got to be scaled and meaningful. And there's a lot of different ideas around that. And I wanted to kind of explore that within the article. We remember innovation theater is sometimes, whether it's venture capital or it's innovation groups that exist within corporates, whoever is responsible for bringing external innovation in, a lot of it is around what we call theater, where it's not really bringing innovation in to drive what the company is trying to drive. A lot of times it's just one-off pilots. There's all this pomp and circumstance, but really what happens to the company that you brought in, and again, whether it was through venture capital investing or just to an innovation group to run a pilot, what's the seriousness that the company's taking in order to use that innovation and grow? And then what's the capabilities that you have to actually bring that innovation in and get it into the right hands and get it to be used in the right way and then grow again? And what happens a lot of times in corporate, as you mentioned, is this focus on returns. And I always say this to any corporate venture I meet, returns are mandatory. There's never been a CFO, and I always say this, that says it's okay to lose money. Just never in the history is it okay to lose money. Um, but those are important, but it's not the only thing because we also have to face, we chase strategic returns as well. And when you have the obsession with returns at all costs, though, it leads to misguided, I think, decisions around scaling. And what happens is we forget to scale before the product works. We launch things before there's a demand. There's endless pivoting. We don't necessarily stick with the innovation that we're trying to build, and we're almost sort of chasing the dream of venture, but not really, in the end, building real companies that matter. And that's what you have to do, and it requires both capital and a corporate commitment. What I mean by corporate commitment, that they actually engage with these portfolio companies and not on a one-off pilot, but actually engage and help build these companies and teach them, especially in our case, how pharma works. And
Mhm.
so the idea really in the end is that, venture capital isn't just about flipping startups for sport. It's really about finding that bold, groundbreaking, super innovative idea that you can scale that changes your company. When we look at a lot of things that we're doing, for example, in AI and ML and drug discovery, I mean, just imagine if we can actually target a molecule and bring that through all the phases of development 5 years faster than we ever did before, or the way we do it today, all because we're using technology that we didn't use before. But you have to play with these kind of companies and learn how to use them in order to build up your competencies. And we believe those things are going to work. But again, like we see a lot of times, there's just theater. There's all this noise around bringing innovation, but we actually don't use it a lot of times. And
Mhm.
it's important, and we'll talk about it as we go on. What are some of the tools that we think about in bringing that innovation in and scaling it? But that's kind of what we mean by innovation theater, and then where that whole idea about, yes, returns are important, but you can't just chase returns. We have to build a company that means something to your corporate, it means something to the industry, and drives value ultimately in the end. And because without value, the one thing I say, when I think about, being strategic and financial, one of the reasons you want to be financial in one respect is that you got to build a strong financially sound company. If you do that, you'll get strategic returns, but strategic returns only happen if you're engaging. And a lot
Mhm.
of times what we don't see is the full engagements that's needed across the organization. And it really is across the organization. We can touch on that a little bit as well. But that's really kind of what we sort of mean by, the whole innovation theater, and what we sort of mean by, where the returns are important, but also scalability and strategic, returns are just as important as well.
Mhm. Yeah, let's jump into that theme of scaling, which is an extremely important piece, of this article, but at the same point, it's sort of your thesis, and it's something that for any of us that have sort of been on the other side and received venture investment, we all know that perspective. Okay, I've had this great innovation, and now my corporate venture capital partner or whomever the partner may be, I got to go from 1 to 5 million units, or there are a certain amount of healthcare organization beds and this, that, and the other thing. Not very easy, and a very important part of your role, and ultimately sort of shepherding companies between these 2 points. I mean, I know you have a list of thoughts on how that appropriate scaling happens, and should happen. And I'd love for you to sort of take a little time here, because for those that may not even be in this business, this isn't easy. This is the real, really where the rubber meets the road. And I'd like you to sort of take us through a lot of your thoughts here on sort of where the pitfalls are, because the section is where innovation goes to die or soar. And this happens all too many times. But take a little time to go into this with us.
Sure. And you're right, it's not easy, and it takes a lot of work and a lot of time. But there are some thoughts that I have that really can help you think about, scaling, a business. I think one of the first things that's really important is you got to build alignment early. One of the things we do, and we call it enterprise coverage, which is just a fancy word of how we approach our business units. One of the things about our venture, firm, is that I don't need to have, a business unit bless the investment. I don't need their sponsorship. But the reality is we do need to work with the business and understand their needs. We call them use cases. So one of the things that we do first is we go out to all our business units across our three sectors, our Merck manufacturing, our Merck Research Labs, and our human health, which is the commercial side. And what we're trying to do is really understand and define what are their most important use cases. What would external innovation do for them, and help them identify, shape, and really pick the use cases that are the most impactful for the business, because we can't solve everything. And the reality is venture capital doesn't solve everything. So what we try to do is say, what are your most important use cases that you're trying to solve? And then can we identify a particular company where our equity will help, build that alignment for you. But you have to start that early. One of the things I learned kind of at the beginning, when we first started with Merck, we were probably a little more telling Merck this is what they need, and maybe not listening as much as we should have. And over time, where we built this competence about listening first and just being the servant attitude towards our customer, which is our internal business units, that really changed our sort of strategic impact that we've had on the company, because now we're solving things that the business needs. And I think that's the important piece that you have to realize as a corporate venture capital firm is understand your business, understand what they're looking for. The other kind of next step, sort of the way we sort of think it sequentially, is that you got to engage a lot of champions. It's not just the business line. A corporate is big, right? And there's a lot of different functions that need to be involved in order to be successful. You have legal, you have compliance, you have IT, you have procurement, you have HR, there's regulatory and compliance for like our area that work together. And you need internal teams to believe in what you're trying to accomplish, for your parent company. And so what we try to make sure we do is, once we understand the use case that we're trying to solve, who else in the company needs to be a part of this? Do we need a regulatory opinion on something? Do we need HR involved? Do we need IT involved? We always need legal. They need to make sure that they're always involved. But it's making sure that you expand across the organization beyond the business line, because you do need champions to say, no, they're doing it the right way. They're doing it for the business, and this is where we can help, because you can't do it yourself. Like I said, the one odd thing about corporates is they're so big, they have so many employees, and a lot of people want to weigh in on what you're doing. And just getting them involved early, I think, is really important. One of the things that we do, I think, is unique, and it's not unique to all corporates, but we started something where we provide sort of a kickstart budget, and we call it our PAP program, which is called Portfolio Acceleration Program. And what we actually do is, with a lot of corporates, what you find is they have off-budget cycles, and it's usually more towards the end of the year where they run out of money. And we introduce them to a startup company or a portfolio company, and they go, well, we don't have the budget to do the pilot we want. What we do is we have an extra budget that we got from the corporate that allows us to kickstart a pilot for them in these off business cycle moments. But the agreement that we have with the business unit is that we only kickstart. We don't pay for the full pilot. They actually have to commit to, once the budget's hit again in the new year, that they have to pick up the rest of the pilot and go ahead and fund it. But what this does is it allows early commitment from the business unit instead of waiting. It allows us to scale the program a little earlier than we would have, because we've got the business unit involved earlier, because we can contribute some of that money. And allows us to scale the program a little more quickly, assuming that the key alignments and the key objectives that you're trying to accomplish have been accomplished. And what we found is, through this program, over 75% of the times we've done this Kickstart program, the business unit itself have re-engaged post that pilot with their own capital to build a longer lasting relationship with a portfolio company. Again, it's a unique area of something we do, but if you have the ability to provide, some Kickstart budgets to your business units, it's a huge way to help start scaling companies. One other thing that we do as well is, maybe a few years ago, we ended up hiring what we call sort of a portfolio success manager. It's actually somebody that sits between the business unit and the portfolio company. What happens a lot of times when you sign an agreement, one of the things that we want to do is we want to track that agreement all the way to the end and find out what happened, good, bad, or indifferent, and we want to report that out. What happens a lot of times is sometimes the issue might lie with Merck. They were supposed to do something they didn't do, so or with the business unit. Sometimes the issue lies with the portfolio company. You need somebody that can manage that interface between the companies, um, to make sure that whatever the commercial agreement that they signed, everybody's doing their part in order to make it successful. Because a lot of times you've seen a big corporate, people might sign the agreement, but they move on from the business unit to, to another part of the organization. We make sure that we have somebody there that understands who all the parties are within our own business that need to be engaged, who are the appropriate people within a portfolio company that need to be engaged, and making sure that they're working together to fulfill the agreement that they all signed together to make it a success. So a lot of people call it an alliance manager.
Hmm.
We just call it a success manager here at Merck. One of the other kind of things that we do as well is we start something. It's we called it Tarvo, which is named after myself and my colleague Joe Volpe. And what is a growth strategy framework that we do for just about all of our startups, and it's really growth consulting for our startups. And what we do is lay out a growth framework for the portfolio companies of what they need to do in order to grow over a 5-year period. And we not only work with the portfolio company, we work with the other investing partners, the syndicate, as well as with the board of directors to help them understand when we're investing in a company, we're doing it for a specific reason. We're trying to grow this company into a long-lasting, viable asset that exists in the world. And there's
Hmm.
ways that we think we can do that. And what we do is we map out that 5-year program for the company and we give it to the company and the board as well as the other syndicate as a playbook to going forward. So it's in a sense offering this sort of consulting for startups that we have the ability to do not only as a venture fund, but as a corporate. Because some of the other areas we also like to do is lend our experts within the corporate to help coach also the portfolio company, because they're learning from us as a pharma company the things that they need to do in order to service our business better. And so it's kind of a way to help these companies accelerate their growth. And I think the last thing, as I mentioned about, I also manage a private equity firm. We partner with growth equity firms. We have the ability to write bigger checks in order to work with private equity funds. And what we call it is rolling up companies. So the whole idea is, as you know, in past conversations, we do something called ecosystem investing.
Hmm.
What we do is we identify sort of that anchor tenant and then we invest around it to fill gaps. And what we try to do is mix and match the right companies, either within our portfolio or outside our portfolio company, that if we bring them together, they bring a more integrated solution and bring success and growth and scaling that again usually pharma needs. And so having the ability to work with private equity firms to help them with their strategy around what we're trying to invest in and work with us to grow these companies at the scale that they need to be has really been a boon for us. And we've done that in a number of our companies, and certainly some that you're familiar with. From our past discussions of some of the ones we've
Hmm.
actually like Preventus
Right.
Solutions, that was all done through private equity. Um, Livongo, was grown through some private equity as well. So a lot of these companies that we have in our portfolio, we've done that. We've just merged recently two of our companies, NPower and SciAps together. That was done with
Yep.
Baker Brothers, which is a large private equity firm. In fact, in the last 6 months, we've done a number of these type of mergers. We brought the whole idea is just in areas that we like, what are the opportunities for us to bring these kind of companies together and finding the right partner to do that.
Right.
So at a high level, I'll kind of stop there and let you, continue asking questions, but that's kind of how we see, kind of the steps that we think are important to scaling and what we've done with our own portfolio, to scale in a way that's made us very successful.
Hmm. Yeah, and just and again, I know, and for everyone listening and watching, you can go to the web page of your portfolio. But some of the ones that popped out at me, just as we're talking on on these very important rules, let's say for as you say, clearing the scaling hurdle, things like transvoyant, which yeah, the whole sort of supply chain system is not just being used internally by Merck now, but the list is impressive. McKesson, United Healthcare, Convatec, DSM, so a wide range of industries there that you've sort of gotten this into. E-health technologies is used by over something 50% of all United States hospitals now. The WellDoc diabetes app. I mean, that's pretty much everywhere. I don't know if you have some favorites here, but these are some of the ones that popped out at me, like that really show. Look, you're not just scaling it within Merck, but everywhere else. Can you just say a couple of words about this, and if there's any other examples that you want to highlight
Yeah, yeah. I
before
mean,
we
if
go
you
to
look at
some?
our portfolio, Datavance, one of our biggest companies that we have, who have, we've done with private equity, and they've, bought a lot of different companies to grow that company to be one of the largest data management companies in the hospital systems that's out there. Very successful. Trinetics, again, larger private equity partner, data company growing very fast on a global basis. So those are two really interesting examples of where we've used private equity to grow the, sort of the data assets in the real world evidence and data market that we have, which are very successful. They don't always get the kind of the press. The other thing that's part of it, prior to getting to private, and I'll give you an example because you raised one of the companies, is in our supply chain, how we get companies to work together. So, for example, we have four
Mm-hmm.
companies that are all very complementary to each other that work together. So, Aerosafe Global, which is the big vaccine cold storage box company, they work with Transvoyant. They work with Tag and Track, for a smart label. And they work with a company called CargoSense. All the four of those companies work together in order to deliver the right kind of integrated solution for pharma in the cold storage box sort of space. And the idea someday is, well, what would that look like if you brought some of those companies together? And we can certainly picture that in our mind. We're maybe not quite ready to do it yet, but the pre-step to doing that is making sure these companies work together. And that's one of the fun things we like to do with our portfolio, is that's the ecosystem, is making sure that you're investing in the parts and pieces that when you make them work together, and they do work together, they're all bringing these better integrated solutions to the market. Then the next step would be, over time, is how do we think about that market and which are the right companies that we might think about working with a larger investor to bring, those companies together for more scale. So you can even see it within the supply chain of how those four companies, just partner together for now. But maybe in the future, that might be something we'll think about, is how do you maybe roll that up into something more exciting or bigger,
Mm-hmm.
if that's the appropriate play.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, the portfolio has been built, a lot around that sort of idea of using as much capital in the right way to scale these kind of companies, and whether it's merging companies together, or at least starting with them partnering together. That's the way we've done it, and I
Mm-hmm.
think it's a smart way, especially for the pharma industry, where scale is important
Right.
for us. And making sure these assets are big enough to exist in the world on their own and provide the services that we all need as large companies.
Mm-hmm. And from that point, Bill, let's add on the one other piece here, which again you're very passionate about, and sort of I refer to as sort of the holy grail, and that's impact, right? Innovation plus scale, now plus impact, and whether it's and again I'm pulling from the portfolio here, but whether it's Delphi Diagnostics' ability to diagnose that one additional lung cancer, whether it's Preventice, which you mentioned, and the ability to prevent one stroke. This is, at the end of the day, ultimately the impact that we're talking about here. Again, talk a little bit about impact as you look at the portfolio, and again, the importance in this innovation equation, because I think this is what, again, Merck wants their returns, but ultimately, at the end of the day, it's about impacting patients. So take us down that
Right.
path.
Right. I mean, ultimately, we work for a pharmaceutical company, and the healthcare industry's role is to help, save and improve patient lives. And ultimately, that's what we're trying to do with all of our investments, regardless of, how they work in that pharma services space. But when you think about success, your first example, finding that one extra patient, a startup that helps find new customers, or for us, sometimes it's new patients, that, help not only us, but other pharmaceutical companies that are using the portfolio company in the same way. That's extremely impactful, especially, if it's a patient that's suffering, a life-threatening disease like, cancer. It becomes really, really important for us, to do those kind of things. But that's one area of success. You think about that startup. Are they getting additional customers beyond Merck, let's just say, or if they can serve multiple industries, are they getting multiple customers? And then within what they do, to your example with Delphi, are they or Cure AI, they're very similar companies finding lung cancer patients. Can they find those additional patients? And that's pretty important thing to do. Um, I think another interesting thing is as we think about scaling, success also goes around revenue streams. Is there a way to build a company to have multiple product lines, where they can have multiple revenue streams beyond, what they started with? Most of these companies, we always say, start as point solutions, but the whole idea is how do they get integrated into other companies, or at least then find multiple revenue streams if they choose to remain, an independent company, because it's hard to survive on that single revenue stream. I think we also think about operational efficiencies. How does a Merck work with these companies, help them understand how we work, um, and then we learn to use these tools that weren't developed in-house, right? Because one of the kind of parts around theater also is that we talked about earlier is, we think we can build these things, and ultimately in the end, we're a pharmaceutical company. We're not a technology and IT company in the traditional sense. We don't build these kind of technologies, so we need someone else to build them that we can actually use. I think that's really important, for success. And I think, maybe the last thing, where, we as even a venture capital firm, did we find something that was out there, um, and kind of deliver this niche technology to our industry before anybody understood that it was a cool thing to do. And we've changed the industry then. And I think that's, kind of a neat area of looking at success. But ultimately, these companies, you got to figure out how to grow them and scale them so they can deliver the impact that your business unit is looking for in the end. And there's a lot of different ways to do it and think about it. But I think without scale, most corporates struggle to work with startup companies unless you can think about growing them in a way, that help them do what they want to do. Even if it's around acquiring, if the corporate's main mandate is to acquire these companies, it still has to get to a point where it's useful to the company to acquire, where it's building additive, capabilities, that the company can actually use, or it becomes, one of those lost companies in a corporate that's, we all have tales of corporates buying companies that we never heard of again, because they get lost in the company where they didn't have the ability to do what the company wanted it to do, from the capability that they were trying to acquire. So all those things matter in the end.
No, it's again, it's very, again, an impressive sort of value chain there that you've put together, and the way you think through, much further than I would say, I guess traditional investors, and ultimately how these technologies and services ultimately develop, is, yeah, it's rather eye-opening. What it's interesting. I was looking back at some of our discussion notes from the last couple of years, and there was a list of sort of predictions at the time that you gave us. I think it was just 2 episodes ago, talking about sort of some of your visions for, how these digital solutions will further integrate into healthcare delivery, and where Gen AI is getting up and so forth, and everything obviously spot on. I mean, the obesity thing that, as well. Where can you take us out a little bit, Bill, into sort of 2026 and beyond, and some of the trends that we should be looking for, as they pertain to, the different aspects of your portfolio? Obviously, investment advice, but what should we be looking out for in next year that we can chat about on the show that we do, the fifth show that we do next year?
Yeah, no, it's funny. It's some things change, they stay the same. So some of the things that we talked about in the past are still growing and have impact. I mean, certainly the biggest discussion point is AI and its impact on healthcare, and we certainly believe that in a lot of aspects of healthcare, AI is going to change our business, like most industries. And at least within the farm side, we're seeing a lot of it. Most of the farmers are investing in AI and ML and drug discovery. There's other parts of the org that are using AI, around medical writing. It's just impacting every part of our org. I think in healthcare, the interesting part of AI where we probably need some probably regulatory oversight is around the patient.
Yeah.
We don't want to find something out about a patient we weren't supposed to find out because AI found out about it. Then what's our obligation, from a legal and a moral obligation to, tell somebody what we know that we maybe weren't supposed to know. So I think, probably a little caution in the patient facing side, but, I look at AI where we were. I think we even talked about this. When I started in 2010 with Merck, monitoring was in its infancy,
Mm-hmm.
remote monitoring. And today you can monitor almost every condition. The devices are so small and they collect so much data and they're technologically so far advanced than what we were in 2010. It's just part of the industry now. We monitor everything, which is really sort of interesting. I think AI is in its infancy right now. We know it's going to have an impact on healthcare. We're learning as we go, right? And it's just a journey. And 10 years from now, we'll be in a totally different place than we were today. And I think I always liken it to that monitoring where it just revolutionized and changed the way we look at healthcare, and patient access, where AI will do the same thing. So I still think that's a big piece. I think the consumerism piece is really starting to change, but it also depends on the pharma. Merck in and of itself, we don't have a lot of consumer direct types of drug like Ozempic. We don't have those kind of drugs that can be bought, online and those type of things. We're a biologics company, but nonetheless, I think the consumerism in healthcare is still growing and patients making more decisions around their healthcare. And we certainly see that with one of our investments, Transparent, which
Hmm.
is Glenn Tolman's new company, which is all around information around making the right choices around your own care, around picking the right physician, the right type of treatment that you want, and having that transparency. So I think we're gonna see the consumerism piece continue to grow as well. I think those are two kind of really interesting spaces. I do think just in at least for me in healthcare, I just because it's a new area and people are only now starting to notice how important it is, the whole supply chain sort of area is a big growth area for pharma.
Hmm.
We all want to make sure that we have the right supply chain. And what's happening is the more um, indications you get for your products, the more new products that you come, you have to have the capacity to, just because you get an indication, you got to make the product, right? And you got to get it out. And so all the pharmas, as they continue to grow and expand, will struggle with capacity and making sure that we have the right supply chain and manufacturing tools in place in order to do that. So I think that's going to be a growing area over the next 5 years because we are starting to see the big, pharma still is expanding and growing and doing well. So I think that's just kind of a overlooked area, even though we're investing in it, but it's an extremely important area, at least to not only us as pharma, but probably healthcare, more broadly.
Hmm.
And just those are just a couple kind of, high level thoughts of some interesting areas that I think are still important to where we're looking at as an investor, and still important to healthcare.
Absolutely, absolutely, and along those lines, and I'm stealing this from a previous article that you wrote, but again, you in this one you talked about sort of, we don't think about the potential of corporate venture capital, but when you look at the capital, the strategic networks, the in-house research, and the talent and the infrastructure that you all just, you walked us through just now, for these different, and the way you manage this ecosystem of portfolio companies, it really is points to the tremendous potential, and it's just another exciting piece that that I enjoy hearing from you and discussing, because some topics we don't get into as much as probably should. We highlight the innovation, but this whole other piece of it is just so very important, and it's nice to see groups like yours sort of leading the way here and the way you think. So yeah, it's always great having you, Bill. Again, I'll take the industry insight that you just gave, and several months from now, next year, we'll do another show and we'll talk about how things have moved and take a. But it's again always great having you. Any final messages while we have you today? That anything I missed, please.
No, I just think, if you're a corporate venture capitalist or any venture capitalist, it's still a great market to be in. You still have impact. It's just the kind of discussion we had today. It's not just about the initial investment and the capital you provide. It's what are you doing to grow the company and helping it scale and build the capabilities that best fit, especially if you're a corporate venture capitalist, your parent company, and what the needs that they're looking for, and be resilient about it. And probably the one thing I've learned the most in doing this is communicate. And when you're done communicate more, and that's up down across the whole organization. And the more they understand the narrative that you're telling around why you exist, what you're doing, and why you're bringing value around external innovation, I think that certainly helps the corporate venture firm survive and keep going forward. And that's what we try to do. So.
Awesome message. Awesome message. Great having you, Bill. As always, and again for everybody that is going to be listening to this episode of our show on the various podcast networks or watching on the YouTube channel. Again, you've been spending time with Bill Taranto, President, Merck Global Health Innovation Fund. Bill, again, I want to thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to come join us for this fourth discussion. Again, thank you for everything you do there to promote innovation, but innovation that's scalable and impactful. And as we like to say on our show, is well, thanks for creating a better tomorrow through the type of investments that you make and the type of companies you grow. Really great story.
Thanks, Ira. Appreciate it. I love coming on your show, and I thank you for having me, and look forward to our next discussion. Thank you very
Do it
much.
in 2026. See you soon.